Please welcome to the stage Barbara Humpton, President and CEO of the Siemens Corporation, and Gerard Baker, Editor-at-Large for the Wall Street Journal. Welcome back to Concordia to you both.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Kevin. Thanks for having us in this in these strange and unusual, but by now I think increasingly kind of familiar circumstances of the digital event, the digital conference. I'm delighted to have Barbara Humpton with me today to talk about the business climate, the environment that we face currently. As Kevin said, of course, Barbara runs the U.S. business of one of the largest and most famous companies in the world, with a very significant U.S. presence, over 50,000 employees. And I want to start, Barbara, if I may. Everybody obviously continues to be focused on COVID, the implications of this epidemic, what it all means, what it's meant for us over the last 6 months, but for the economy, for business. But I think we're all thinking too, we've all learned a lot in the last 6 months about the way we work, the way our businesses work, the way the economy works, the way the global economy works. Barbara, let's start by, tell me if you would, what some of the lessons, some of the larger lessons that you think you've learned in the last 6 months from this enforced incarceration that we've all been living through.
Thanks, Jerry. And also, first, let me just say what an honor and a privilege it is to be here with the Concordia audience. And yes, this has been a remarkable period in our history. Siemens is a company that was built to serve society. We're active in all kinds of critical infrastructure. And Siemens has been in the United States over 160 years. So as the pandemic reached our shores, it was a moment when we really needed to step up and answer the call. So from colleagues who are experts in power, keeping the lights on, to manufacturing, helping manufacturers across the country ramp up supply of things like PPE, to smart buildings, trying to figure out how we can apply technology to solve problems of how will we occupy buildings, to mobility. But maybe most importantly, healthcare. So our colleagues in Healthineers went to work immediately on really helping in the cause. They had a virus detection capability. They got emergency use approval fairly early in the pandemic. And then they also came along with a total antibody test, which we know is going to be very valuable as we move forward in understanding public health and the progress of the virus through our communities. Now, when we first got into the pandemic, one of the first things we needed to do, of course, was attend to the safety of employees. So everyone who could work digitally, virtually, went home. And like many, many businesses, virtually overnight,
how many would the proportion of your workforce, how many would that be who have been working digitally, working from home, working remotely?
I'll tell you, about 2/3 of our workforce went home. And about a third of the workforce really needed to be in factories or on site at power plants or, providing service in hospitals and elsewhere. So, right, overnight, the burden on our IT systems, was phenomenal, and the team responded. So we were able to connect. And what we've learned over these last few months is that these digital tools, which were already part of our, what I'll call our long-term strategic approach for the future, really turned out to be assets for us here in the near term. And I think what you've heard from many, and certainly Siemens is included, is we've seen the pace of change accelerate. Things that we knew were going to be inevitable over a 5-year horizon, now we've implemented in a matter of months.
I want to ask you about some of those. I mean, from my own perspective, I work for what we used to call a newspaper, but we now call a news organization. And news people have an idea of what newspapers do, news organizations do, and it's a news product is put together by reporters who, chew up shoe leather by going out and finding out stories and talking to people, by editors who sit in a big office together conferring and working out what the paper should look like, and by people who work in printing and print out a paper. We put the entire Wall Street Journal out for the last 6 months almost completely remotely. You walk into our Midtown offices here in Manhattan, and there is literally not a single person there other than the kind of emergency staff. And we are obviously thinking through what that means in terms of what our long-term working practices and needs are, and we've come to some conclusions about that. You must be doing the same thing. And tell us, if you can, what you think from what you've experienced in the last 6 months, what will change permanently in the way in which Siemens works?
We've already made one big announcement globally, and that is we love this new way of working. We've heard from employees all around the world who say, wow, the change of being able to work from home, or I'll just say to be able to work from anywhere, has been liberating. And so our commitment to employees is this is our new way of working. We're going to expect employees to spend on average 2 to 3 days a week in the office. There will be some people who will virtually never come in. There will be others who need to be on site, but on average, about 2 to 3 days per week, not in the office. That means we ask a different question. So, what do we do in offices these days? Why do we need to gather physically? And we all know there's nothing like the Concordia event where we have the chance to bump into people in the hallways and reconnect with friends, maybe meet new ones. And we're trying to figure out how to keep that spirit of human connection going with the understanding that there is a tremendous amount we can do virtually now.
Well, so we had an interesting piece in the Wall Street Journal a couple of weeks ago with Reed Hastings, who's the CEO of Netflix, obviously, which is a company that has done rather well, obviously, in lockdown. And he was asked directly, what benefits has he seen from working from home, from remote working? And he said, none. I really can't see it. We miss the creative tension. We miss the collaboration. We miss the innovation and the ideas that are generated by people being together. You sound more optimistic, though, actually, that in fact that there are things that you can carry on doing and continue to be productive and effective as a company. Is that right?
Oh, that's so true. And I'll do you one better. This is even more about what are the things we could never do before that we can do now that we've discovered these tools. And I'll give you a couple of examples. It used to be that we would send large teams out to power plants when there was an annual maintenance outage. We would send a big team and they would go and crawl all over the plant and change things. This time, because we were concerned about the spread of the virus, we sent smaller teams, but we had them connected back to experts with virtual reality. Now think about that. If we had experts who could be anywhere in the world at a moment's notice, how would we reorganize our work? We really think we're in a moment where we're thinking less about how do we recreate what we used to do in person and thinking instead about what can we do now that was never possible before.
Let's move on and talk, because we don't have a huge amount of time, so quickly talk about some of the larger trends, if you like, that COVID and that are generally have been visible in the economy and in business in the last year, and as it goes on. Your part, as I say, you run the US division of an enormous globally interconnected company, manufacturing services, technology, everything. Obviously, there's been a lot of focus on supply chains and concerns about supply chains and a concern that some of the efficiencies that the global economy has seen in the last 20, 30 years through the creation of this very interconnected global supply chain, that's going to be arrested or even retarded, and that we're going to actually probably revert much more to kind of shorter supply chains, more national focus, more reshoring as people talk about that kind of stuff. What's your perspective on that?
Yeah. Oh, I'll tell you what, Jerry. In the early days of the pandemic, our supply chain professionals were our critical first responders. I mean, but we are part of critical infrastructure. It was necessary for us to be performing at all times. And the question of can we get all the supplies we need was top of mind. And what I witnessed was a global effort to reroute supply chains, find alternative sources, assure that we never missed a beat with customers. And that's vitally important. But the interesting convergence of two things may actually spell positive change for resilience. One is this: we've had this awakening about what a pandemic can do to disrupt global supply chains. So we recognize the need to be more local. But at the same time, we have technologies that are making it possible for us to manufacture closer to the point of demand. The new digital tools in manufacturing are brilliant for enabling us to share designs, share work processes, procedures, and ensure that we can stand up operations more locally, as you say. And we think that's going to be good both for economies and for the resilience of organizations around the world.
And let's talk a bit about that technology, because again, one of the things we've seen in the last 6 months is an acceleration of the implementation of technology. I mean, again, from the simplest level of people working from home and watching Netflix and spending an awful lot more time on their mobile devices and various other things, obviously right out to companies rethinking, as you say, global supply chains, thinking about how they use technology. Give us a sense of what, and you're very much at the cutting edge of this, of course, in Siemens. Give us a sense of what you think are the areas of, everybody's always talking about AI and the use of data and how that's going to evolve. Give us a sense again of what you've learned in the last year or so and what you expect in the next year or so to be the key driving trends in innovation, in technology innovation.
Yeah, in Siemens USA, we had developed a plan called the U.S. Agenda 2030. It laid out our view of 5 important markets for us. So everything from future distributed energy to the future of transportation, et cetera. And so about May timeframe, we decided we really need to pause and take a look and ask how COVID is affecting us and see if there were any major changes. And if we didn't have a crystal ball yet that would tell us exactly how things will change, we decided we'd be looking for what are those signal points where we could either see, things trending one way or another. So, examples. The future of mobility. We believe that mobility is going to be more and more electrified as we move forward. And it makes so much sense for a lot of reasons. I mean, how many of us loved seeing those crystal clear blue skies? We know that cities all across the country and around the world are focused on decarbonization. And we know that the technology is there to transition our mobility systems, whether that be trains, future planes, or whether that is really in the city bus fleets, et cetera. And so we've got innovators like a company, Amply, who I've interviewed recently for my podcast, The Optimistic Outlook. They're actually looking at the business model and offering a way to take the risk of price fluctuations out of that electricity purchase so that fleet operators can make the transition to electric more easily. I mean, those kinds of things are going to make a big difference in what our future looks like. And pick any topic. What's happening with medicine? What's happening in buildings? Probably the most pressing thing right now is our Smart Infrastructure Come Back with Confidence campaign, really showing us the technologies we can use in buildings to help assure the safety and health of people who are resident in buildings.
You talked about cities and people are rethinking perhaps the nature of cities, and we've seen something of an exodus. Again, I'm here in New York City, and there's endless talk about people leaving New York and maybe never coming back. I'm a little skeptical about that, but certainly there's no question there's a sense that as people work from home and as people get used to sort of different working environments, that the traditional idea of cities may change. And you talked about transportation, mobility. What do you think? What have you done anything at Siemens? Have you actually, as the pandemic forced you to rethink your priorities in terms of what the various businesses that you have between healthcare and mobility and transportation and energy? Do you think there is really important long-term trends that require you to be more invested in one area rather than another?
So far, what I'm seeing is that the large businesses that have been established over these last few years all have very meaningful and fruitful markets to address going forward. And the whole idea of the core capabilities of Siemens are electrification, automation, and digitalization. And so the same technologies that you've seen come to our entertainment world, making Netflix critical infrastructure for all of us, are also coming to the world of critical infrastructure like transportation, like buildings, like the inner cities, right? So we actually are in markets that are rapidly transforming, and that spells opportunity. Now, do we have pockets where we have teams devoted to, say, the hospitality industry that has suffered so terribly? Yes, we do. We have one business, by the way, that focuses in, if you can believe this, on the postal service and airplane logistics. Have they had a tough time? Absolutely. But in all cases, what we've been finding is the moment of the pandemic has had some silver linings. when people are traveling less, it's a perfect time to do the behind the scenes work to upgrade transportation and do critical maintenance, right? So I think we do have to continue to watch to see if there are, long-term, what I'll call structural changes in those markets. But as I say, we're poised with technologies that really bridge the physical and the new digital world that is coming to the forefront.
Let's talk about energy. It's a very important part of your business here, I know. Before the pandemic, it was very much on everybody's mind, sustainability. People were very aggressively addressing some of these issues. Investors are very interested in the whole environmental opportunities. Has the pandemic, other than, as you say, producing cleaner skies and a little less pollution, and of course, changing people's focus in terms of public health, perhaps more, again, in terms of focus more on national supply chains, has it changed the way you think about energy production and the shift towards sustainable energy? Has it accelerated that? Or are we going to go back, whenever this is over, to onto the same kind of trends that we were on before?
I don't think that we go back, right? I think that we have been on a positive trend toward, say, renewable energy, power generation, but more importantly, a powerful trend toward the electrification of areas. A year ago, we talked about 1 billion people around the world without access to reliable energy. And so the key of actually helping countries bring power literally to their people has been an important focus of ours. And we expect that to continue. Now, all countries are on some kind of transition. And around the world, what you'll see is that renewable energy now beats fossil fuels on price. About 2/3 of the countries in the world that represent, 2/3 of the population and more than 70% of total GDP now see renewable energy as less expensive. And therefore, the business case alone creates these market conditions that I think lead us to a very different future than we had been contemplating. Now, did the pandemic interfere or accelerate in any way? I'm not sure about that. Most of the projects we're talking about require years in the planning. And so, the critical thing is that the commitment has remained. And a huge word of encouragement I'm giving to anyone who will listen is, as we spend stimulus dollars around the world, we should be focusing those dollars on building for the future with the kinds of technologies that we want to see carrying us forward.
We live in again, you lead a very important part of a very important global company. We live in a world that has seen the explosion of growth in these in the global economy and in these led by these big global companies in the last 30 years or so. We've had a pandemic. The pandemic came on top of what could be seen as social and political pressures, perhaps, that were pushing against that globalization and pushing towards more domestic, more nationally focused economic priorities and away from perhaps the kind of what we'd seen over the last 30 years. And now, again, on top of that, as I say, we have the pandemic. Is that something that we are now going to have to get used to, that the idea that actually that the kind of globalization that we saw that produced a tremendous amount of growth, but also produced tremendous inequalities and great dislocations for a lot of people? Do you think we are now, and all the evidence is that in terms of trade and investment and look at U.S. relations with China, that we are looking at a much more nationally focused future? Is that, do you think, now the reality? And if so, how do we adjust to that?
Well, it's certainly, you are describing the reality we're living in right now. And I think this is absolutely something to wrestle with. I mean, this is one of the valuable things we do through our governments and through non-governmental organizations. And I would say even through business. And let me just paint a picture for you from a business perspective. We're a global business. Should the main axis of our business be local and empowerment to the local teams who are serving local markets? Or is it more valuable, and does it generate more value for us to be global and work to basically invent technologies that we can deploy globally? I think Siemens isn't alone in asking exactly this question and working day in, day out to find the right balance so that we serve our customers everywhere and take advantage of global innovation that's going on. So I sort of take that as one case example of the kind of things that we see going on in our political world as well. So we have the capability to be global with our travel, with our communication. We have it at our fingertips to be connected. And the question is, how much should we be taking advantage of that, and how much of it should we be striving for, individual empowerment and local presence? In our case, one of the things we've discovered is that networks beat hierarchies day in, day out. And so we really are looking to be an organization that's very empowered on the local level, but able to tap into and take advantage of innovations going on at the global level.
We're almost out of time, so we've got time for just one more brief question, and I want to leave our viewers on a slightly more positive and upbeat note than perhaps some of the headlines that we're used to seeing over the last few months. It's been obviously a very turbulent time in the United States. Pandemic, social unrest, political uncertainty, economic crisis, obviously, that we've seen. Is it what? But in that, we've all had to deal with a lot of that. But we've all probably taken away some positive things from the experience of the last 6 months. Is there one particular thing for you that you feel has that you can take away from this experience of the last 6 months that you feel is positive, that can improve, is improving either your way of life or the way you run your business, the way your business operates? If there's one particularly positive thing that's come out of this, what would it be?
I would say the most positive thing I've seen come out of this is this growing awareness that one of the most powerful, I'll say, characteristics of leaders today is empathy. And those who show empathy are doing a tremendous service. I've heard more people talk about love, joy, and human connections in the last 6 months in business than I have in my career up until now.
Well, that I couldn't ask for a more positive, more uplifting note on which to end, and I agree, and it's very good to hear that. Barbara Humpton of Siemens USA, thank you very much indeed for joining us, and thanks everybody for joining this panel, this town hall discussion. And I hand it back to Kevin.